One of the things I and others have been talking about in regards to Michael Bloomberg is his longtime embrace of austerity economics, which is very much the anti-government, lordly view of the rich and powerful, consensus view by and large among the rich and powerful, with some exceptions. But someone else who has written, a co-authored an excellent piece on this topic is about to join us now. It is none other than our old friend, Nancy Altman. Nancy is the executive director of Social Security Works, and she co-wrote with Linda Benish a piece that was published as Bloomberg still, in parentheses, wants to cut Social Security. So, and I thought it was an excellent take. I wanted to talk to her more about it. So first of all, Nancy Altman, welcome back to the program.
Thank you so much for having me.
So it's a pleasure. And you make a great point going in, and I think it's great because I said it myself. That's how great I think. Of all the, but it's a good way to lead. Of all the Democrats contending for the presidential nomination, Bloomberg is the worst choice to debate Trump on Social Security because he's to the right of Trump on that issue, which is something that will, I think, surprise a lot of readers. So readers of your piece and listeners now. So tell us a little bit about that. How is he to the right of Donald Trump?
Well, first of all, just to clarify, he is to the right of what Donald Trump claims is his position when he's out talking to the American people at the State of the Union during the 2016 campaign. He said no cuts to Social Security, Medicare, or Medicaid. Now, in reality, in his years in office, every budget has proposed cuts to these programs, and through the Social Security Administration, there have been a lot of regulations, proposed regulations that would cut people's, or make it harder for people to access benefits. He certainly went after Medicare and Medicaid, but his stated position is no cuts. Now, of course, as we know, Mayor Bloomberg, until recently, was a Republican, and he was right with the Republican line that you got to give tax cuts for the very wealthy, and you've got to scale back the programs that really work for the American people, Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. And that's the way he's to the right. The Democratic Party is fully in favor now of expanding Social Security with no cuts. Trump is for he pretends he's for no cuts because that's much more politically popular than the Bloomberg position, which is we've got to cut these programs.
So also, by the way, one of the things that struck me is that wherever Bloomberg in the past has deviated from the Republican Democratic insider consensus about cutting Social Security when most people wanted it expanded. So it's undemocratic, right? Because when both parties agree to a position that's the opposite of what the public wants, something's broken in democracy. But in the past, the only divergence I've seen from that elite view from Michael Bloomberg is when he thought it didn't go far enough in cutting. I'm thinking, for example, of the super committee. When you remember the super committee that was supposed to recommend of Republicans and Democrats in the Senate, they were going to recommend an austerity program for all of us, and Bloomberg's reaction was it doesn't go far enough. So and you point out that not only did he love the Bowles-Simpson Commission, which tried to do the same thing, but that and I want to talk about this for a second, not only has he wanted to raise the retirement age and do all that, but he compared, this to me is the idiocy of people who think they're smart about economics, compared Social Security to a Ponzi scheme. Isn't this the dumbest, most economically illiterate mischaracterization possible? I mean, maybe you don't want to put it that strongly.
I would say it's worse than that. I would say it's a slander. What he's saying, as we all know, a Ponzi scheme is a criminal activity. It's an attempt to deceive innocent people, to get them to give you your money and pretend you're giving them big investments and then steal it. And is that really what he's saying that Franklin Roosevelt did, that President Eisenhower was a criminal when he signed the Social Security disability insurance benefits into law. So he's saying every Congress did that. That Lyndon Johnson was it's an outrage. Social Security is extremely transparent. Every year there is a trustees report that documents the income and outgo of the program, not just over 5 years or 10 years, but over 3/4 of a century or more. It's all online. It's there for anyone to see. It's very transparent. And let me say it a different way. And that is that here's where you could call it ignorance. I say it's a willful denial to see. And that is all pension plans, private as well as public, have to be funded, and they can be funded through what's called current funding or advanced funding. For much of the history of this country, private pensions were current funded. But the problem with that is that private companies can go out of business. They can fail to run a profit. They can, so you need, and then if that happens and they're current funded and they go out of business, then their workers and their retirees are left holding the bag. That's not going to happen with Social Security because the federal government does not need to run a profit and is permanent, is not going to go out of business. So there's been debate over the course of the history of Social Security, whether the program should be advance funded, whether it should be current funded. It started out in 1935, partly advance funded. 39, it was changed to current funding. There were advisory councils that decided current funding was the right thing in the 1950s. Now we're actually a little bit advance funded. The point is that there's not a right or wrong to this. It's just a way to accumulate the assets, and there are pros and cons to both approaches. But calling it a Ponzi scheme is an outrage. This also, another way to think about it is, throughout history, adult children have cared for their aging parents. Is that a Ponzi scheme because young workers are transferring to older workers? I don't think most people would call taking care of your parents a Ponzi scheme.
Right. And I this gets into, probably more than we can cover today, but, it's social insurance. What does it mean? Is it a Ponzi scheme? I didn't have an car accident last year, but I paid my premiums, and just a small minority of people, got a payoff, right? The ones who were in car accidents. So does that make it a Ponzi scheme, or does it make it insurance, which is part of the fabric of ensuring we're all safe and, have a civilized society? So there are a million ways. I'm sorry, you were going to say something?
And if I can make one more point about that, and that is when you put your money in the bank, you expect when you want to draw on it, you get it back with the interest that's been accrued. Now, the bank is lending it out, doing other things with that money. That's not criminal. That's just the way it is set up. That's the way the economy works. Of all the people who should know, a billionaire who's made his money in New York should understand how basic transfers and how insurance works, how all of these programs work. And so he either is much more ignorant than we think, or he's part of really a conspiracy. There's been a literally billionaire funded campaign. We usually think of it as the Koch brothers and Pete Peterson, who was a billionaire who passed away, who really had a vendetta against these programs that really help the American people and really put a lie to the idea that the private sector is always better than the public sector. These are programs that work, and so they've had a vendetta against it. They couldn't convince the American people they don't need this kind of insurance. So what they've said is, it's a variety of things, that it's essentially unaffordable. And calling it a Ponzi scheme is another way to simply undermine confidence with the hope that it someday they can, not that it will collapse on its own, which is what a Ponzi scheme does, but they will so weaken confidence in it that their lackeys in Congress will be willing to do their bidding and get rid of the program.
which they've been perilously close to doing at times, as we both know. And again, we're talking to Nancy Altman, Executive Director of Social Security Works. One of the great things that you and Linda point out in this op-ed is the weasel, now this is my phrase, the weasel words that Bloomberg uses. And by the way, I do want to add that Bloomberg's calling it a Ponzi scheme is also shockingly ignorant when you consider the fact that the guy makes his money running a financial news service.
Yes.
And you know, now he's released a Social Security plan, as you and Linda point out, but it's just chock full of, bullet number one, consider options. Right away, you've lost me, Bloomberg, because it's like, yeah, I don't want to know what you will consider. I want to know what you will do for preserving and strengthening Social Security's long-term finances while maintaining and enhancing benefits for the neediest recipients. To me, this is all of the escape hatches, the double talkers who want to cut Social Security build into their rhetoric. Well, we'll make sure the poor don't starve. Well, so you're going to cut everybody else's benefits. What's the average benefit for a woman now? Is it up to $1,200 a month? Yeah, you're going to cut that unless she can't, what? So let's talk about the weasel words for a second.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, as you say, Social Security provides the majority of income for 2/3 of people who are retired. 2/3. So, and the idea, this is, again, the conservative dream. It's been the desire from the beginning. And that is not to have a universal broad-based earned benefit, but to let the, as the wealthy often say, the little people, have, make sure they don't starve in the streets, let them have some crumbs. And his plan could have been authored by Paul Ryan. It could have been authored by Mitch McConnell. It could have been authored by the Koch brothers, because what they really want to do, Social Security is deferred compensation. It is part of your earnings. So the idea of it's really reaching into people's pockets and taking out money that they have earned. This is not welfare. I mean, we need welfare. Welfare is very important. But the dream is, what makes Social Security so strong is that it is universal. So it's got a lot of support, and it's meant to be universal because these are universal risks. Rich or poor, any of us can walk out in the street and get hit by a truck and be so permanently and seriously disabled that we cannot support ourselves. And if you're 30 years old, you could be working, very high, a high-paid lawyer, but you won't have saved very much if you're only 30 years old. The same thing can happen if you die leaving young children. You need life insurance. You need disability insurance. That's what Social Security provides. And it also, we all hope to reach old age, but there's something called a longevity risk. Obviously, if you're only going to live to 57, then you don't need that much for retirement. You probably won't retire. But if you live to 105, you're going to need a lot of insurance. And Social Security, unlike savings, you cannot outlive. So the point is, this is a program that meets a universal need. It's part of the thing that billionaires hate about it, because they believe that that they don't want to contribute to the common good. They want to keep their money for them. But what these plans all say is that people should pay their fair share. It's decidedly not what Mayor Bloomberg is proposing.
One of the positives that I was able to take from your piece, Nancy Altman, was how far the Democratic Party, you and I have talked about this before, but once again, at least being able to celebrate the rhetorical shift among the Democratic Party leadership. You point out that not only does Bernie Sanders' plan roll out cuts and call for expansion, and Elizabeth Warren's, which we would expect given their history. Pete Buttigieg says he won't cut any Social Security. And, all these plans to means test Social Security, which seems to be what Bloomberg's dancing around, make the most fortunate pay their fair share, which to me, and that's Pete Buttigieg, who's positioning himself as the centrist in this race. But of course, and Biden's is similar. He would ask Americans with especially high wages to pay the same taxes on those earnings that middle class families pay. Well, both Buttigieg and Biden, as a sort of center right lane of this discussion, even they are talking about helping the Social Security community of recipients by raising Michael Bloomberg's taxes, I guess. And we only have a minute left, but is it just self-interest? You alluded to this earlier, or
Well,
I can't.
I think it's self-interest, and it's also ideology. And it's important to point out, as you know, I really like the history, and it's really the Democratic Party returning to its roots, and the Republican Party actually also returning to its roots. And I'll explain both. That as we know, Social Security was the creation of Franklin Roosevelt and the Democratic Congress, and they saw it as a cornerstone on which to build. That is how President Roosevelt described it in his signing statement. And sure enough, they added, and just 4 years later, survivor benefits. They've added disability benefits, and they've increased the benefits over time. Although the last time benefits were increased were in 1972. Then they went through this period where the billionaire class somehow convinced the elites in Washington, including too many Democrats, that somehow the wealthiest nation in the world at the wealthiest moment in its history could no longer afford this program, which has extremely modest benefits, extremely low administrative costs, that somehow all of a sudden it was not affordable. That unfortunately lasted through the 80s. That was the Reagan Revolution, that government's not the solution, it's the problem. It went and the 80s, 90s, 2000s up into Barack Obama. It was actually Bernie Sanders running for president in 2016 that turned it around. First, Hillary Clinton had to go back and say, no, I'm for expansion too. And then President Obama said, no, I'm for expansion too. And if you look at the 2016 Democratic platform, it is very strongly in favor of expansion. Now, the Republican Party, it was a little different. They started out in the 1930s, and at least they were honest about it. They called Social Security socialism, and they said it was going to pull down the pillars of the capitalist economy on our heads, and all kinds of over-the-top language. And the American people rejected it because they understood how important this program is. And once it got established, they became more and more of a fringe group. President Eisenhower called them a small splinter group. And the mainstream Republicans went along with supporting Social Security, but wanted to keep it just as a foundation, not to make it too large. So they would fight the expansion, but they supported the underlying program. Again, President Reagan changed all that around, and the Republicans are now to the right of where Eisenhower was, and want to end these programs.
So, and I guess, of course, the fear here, not entirely unwarranted, is that Michael Bloomberg might take the Democrats in a similar direction, given, among other things, that he was a Republican for part of his life. Unfortunately, however, we're going to have to leave it there. So if people want to know more, they should look for this piece in Common Dreams, or I'm sure it was published elsewhere as well. Bloomberg still, in parentheses, wants to cut Social Security, and there's always a tell, right? And the Weasel Words are the tell. So Nancy Altman, Executive Director of Social Security Works, thanks for co-authoring this piece. And as always, thanks for coming on the program.
And again, thank you for having me.